Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Teaching Kitchen here at New York-Presbyterian, Hudson Valley Hospital. My name is Chef Emily. If I'm meeting you for the first time, welcome. And if you're joining us again, thank you for coming back and continuing to cook with me. I hope you found these recipes to be helpful, inspiring, and delicious in your own homes. So thank you for joining us. And thank you, Alita, for moderating our class this evening. Our focus is plant-based meals with mushrooms. So I am obsessed with the flavor that mushrooms have. I think they are so special and delicious and unique. And so I wanted to really shape a whole class around mushrooms for you all. So I'm hoping that if you're joining, that you're also a fan. And if you're not a fan of mushrooms, then maybe some of these recipes can help to convince you otherwise. So just a few Zoom ground rules before we dive in. Kindly keep your microphones muted throughout the presentation, just to make sure there's not extra feedback noise. And if you do have questions, which are always encouraged, please put them into the chat box. And Alita, who's volunteering with us today, will relay your questions to me throughout the program. So as we begin, Alita, I just noticed a couple of things popped up in the chat box. Would you mind sharing what do we have so far in terms of questions, and then we'll dive into the recipes?
Sure. One of the comments is from me letting everybody know that, welcome to the class, and also
thank you.
Questions in the chat box. But Denise said that you mentioned before a type of mushroom that is rather mild in flavor, and she wanted to know what that type of mushroom was again.
Yeah. So Denise, welcome, and thank you for your question right off the bat. So there are definitely there's the whole mushroom family, the fungus family, and within that there are some mushrooms that are really kind of earthy and kind of have a really strong taste, and others that are milder. So if you just think, I don't like mushrooms, well, there's a whole spectrum of mushroom flavor to enjoy. Like truffles are very, very strong in terms of their flavor. And then you have chanterelles, which are pretty strong as well, but a little more delicate. You have things like morels and hen of the woods and shiitake and maitake. So there's a whole stretch of them, but I think the mildest one, the one that's not super duper mushroomy, is going to be your white button mushroom. So that's your classic Parisian mushroom. It's small, it's white, it looks just like the cremini, but without the brown color. So that would be, I think, the mildest one. So if you're kind of new to mushrooms and you want to experiment with it a little bit, and you're not, too sure about the flavor, make these recipes with the white button mushrooms, because they're the mildest. All right, great. So let's jump in. We've got two recipes for you today, and we're going to start by making our polenta gratin. Gratin is basically a dish with cheese on top, and it's baked in the oven. It's kind of similar to a casserole, but usually the cheese is on top. And for this one, because it's plant-based, you can use a cashew cheese or an almond cheese or a plant-based cheese of your choosing. Just a brief orientation on what it means to be plant-based. It means that most of your nutrition, most of your food is coming from plants in one form or another. So cheese wouldn't necessarily be considered plant-based because it comes from an animal, unless it's a plant-based cheese like almond or cashew or something like that. But also to clarify, plant-based doesn't mean only plants. So a lot of people who are plant-based eaters will enjoy a little bit of cheese every now and then, maybe some seafood, maybe some meat even, right? So it's not such a strict kind of way of eating, which is one of the reasons that I really like it. So the central focus is on plants, and then occasionally, mixing in some other food groups as well. So to make this dish, we're going to start by making our polenta. This is the polenta that I use today. This is also known as corn grits. And polenta has different kind of like textures. You can get a super fine polenta, a medium coarse, and a coarse. So it's up to you. Whichever one you want to choose is absolutely fine. But the cooking instructions right here on the back are 3 cups of water, half a teaspoon of salt, bring it to a boil, add your cup of corn grits or polenta, and whisk, right? So this is the tricky thing. You have to kind of cook slowly for 5 minutes, stirring occasionally, and then you're gonna remove the cover and kind of let it, let it cook entirely. So I did this ahead of time, and I have my cooked polenta here on the stove to show you all, because it does take a little bit of time. So I'm going to go ahead and I used a whisk to continue stirring so it didn't get clumpy. Often one of the things that I find people get stuck with on polenta is that it gets lumpy, and then it's kind of not that nice smooth texture. So if that does happen to you, you can add a little more liquid or vegetable broth or whatever you're using, and just keep kind of whisking it to try to get those lumps out and relax the polenta. All right, so we have our baking dish here, and we're going to start by spreading this out in one even layer. And this is going to sort of form the base of our dish. So we've got our cornmeal or polenta, which is corn-based, at the root of this. I used a little bit of ghee, but you could also use butter. Ghee is clarified butter. So about a tablespoon or 2 at the end, just to kind of give it an extra something, flavorful. You could use olive oil instead, or just leave it out and just go with the water and the polenta. All right, so this is now spread out. I'm going to set this to the side to let it chill. Doesn't have to be in the refrigerator, but you can refrigerate it if you want. And we're going to get started with our mushrooms. Any questions about the polenta base before we go to the next recipe? The next step, I'm sorry.
There are comments about the mushrooms.
Yeah.
So E says that she finds that the mushrooms get stronger flavored when they start getting older, when they're not so white anymore.
Yes.
And then Judy wants to know about portobello mushrooms.
Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit about why. We're going to talk a little bit about why mushrooms, the nutrients of mushrooms, a little bit about mushrooms, and definitely as mushrooms get, the flavor deepens as they age. So the way you store mushrooms is in a closed paper bag in your refrigerator for usually up to 5 days. And I'm also going to help you identify, sorry, I have a little allergy today, identify what is, how do you choose a good mushroom and all the difference. So we're going to go over all of that. I do want to get these recipes going, and then we're going to talk a little bit more. So let's start with the first one, which is the gratin. We're going to start by getting a big pan. You want the biggest pan you have, or you can do this in 2 batches, because mushrooms really, all of the flavor is brought out if they get a lot of good contact surface with the pan. So we're going to start by getting our onions ready. Take off the top and take off the bottom, and we're just going to mince this, nice and small. We're going to peel it. And actually a trick that I did today, because this paper looked like it was really going to stick, is I soaked the onion in some water just for like 10 minutes before class. And you can see this paper is coming off a lot, more easily than usual. Well, I say that, but now it's the other one's not letting. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So, soaking the onion in some water does help to kind of release the paper from the onion, which makes sense, right? Because the paper is really dry, it's going to adhere more closely. All right, so we're getting our pan nice and hot first, and we're going to just do a little dice on our onion. The top is here, the bottom is here, and I'm not cutting all the way through, just to do a quick and easy. This is a really big onion, so I don't know that we're going to need all of it, but onion's always so flavorful. So I think the best flavor compounds to add to any mushroom dish are going to be onion, white wine, garlic is wonderful, and herbs. That's really, for me, the best combination when it comes to mushrooms. Using those in some kind of some kind of connected way is really, really yummy. All right, I'm not going to use the whole onion because that's going to be a little too much. So we'll use that for stock. Let's start by getting our olive oil in, sauteing our onion. And again, you want a spacious pan, as spacious as you can get one. Not everybody, I don't have a pan this big at home. So when I'm at home, I do this in 2 batches. Right. Try not to cry. It's okay to cry, right? It's very healing for us. All right, moving this onion around. I'm just starting with the onion, and then I'm also going to add the herbs. So what herbs am I using today? Primarily the woodier ones. I'm going to be using some thyme and some rosemary. So I picked this ahead of time. And I also added a little bit of dried basil in here too. So I'm just going to chop this up because I want my rosemary to be nice and small. I don't want anything like too big in there. So you can just kind of chop up the herbs. This also helps to open them up and kind of awaken them to the fact that they are going to be cooked soon. So that all of their fragrance kind of comes out when you kind of crush them up a little bit. So we've got our thyme, rosemary, and dried basil. Those are our 3 herbs that we're using in this. And when I'm working with thyme, I just hold the stem and kind of strip the leaves off the stem. It's the quickest way to do it. All right, we're gonna also add our garlic in just a moment. I don't wanna add the garlic right away because it's just gonna burn when the onions are not quite soft yet. And I see a question came through.
Yeah, there's several questions and some comments. So Valerie says that white mushrooms can also be eaten raw, sliced with herbs and a vinaigrette to make a nice summer salad. The taste will be milder because they are not cooked. And then Patricia wants to know, is it safe to eat raw mushrooms?
Yeah, so great question. So you can, certainly raw mushrooms are often found on a salad bar and stuff like that. It's not the best idea to eat large quantities of raw mushrooms though, because they do contain some compound, I can't remember what it's called, that is better if it's cooked or cooked out. So that's sort of my 2 cents on it. Is you can certainly certain types of mushrooms you can eat raw, but it's really best to eat them cooked. Although Valerie, your salad sounds really tasty.
I know, right? Sounds delicious.
Yeah.
What about using instant polenta?
You could use instant polenta for this. Absolutely, that would be just fine. Yeah, instant polenta is just polenta that's kind of been parboiled, so it cooks faster. Hard to find though. All right, we're ready for our garlic and our mushrooms and our wine. Anything else?
Yes, can you use leeks?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Instead of the onions, yeah, you could make this with leeks. It would be really good with shallots as well. Yeah, any of those would be good. And
then another question for Mona, could you use basil?
Basil, like fresh basil instead of something, or might have to clarify that for me a little bit.
You put instead, I guess, using basil instead of maybe some of the herbs that you're using.
So if you want to use fresh basil on this, I would use it as a topping at the end. I wouldn't cook it in at the beginning because fresh basil is like such a special, amazing taste. You really want to have it in at the end. But it would be really good on top. I like that.
Delicious. Susan wants to know, what brand of knife do you use?
Okay, we'll get to that, Susan. I think it's Worcester for WUSTHOF. Came with the kitchen. So I'm not going to complain. It's a great knife. So back to our mushrooms. I'm just going to trim the bottom. This is our shiitake variety. And you can see it's kind of drier. And you can see how tightly packed those gills are, right? So this is like a little sponge. So you want to clean this with a damp towel and just brush off any dirt. And, I don't worry too much about having a little dirt on there, but most of it you want to get off. And then you're just going to chop it up. All right, same thing with the baby bellas. I'm going to put these in and get these going. It does take a little bit of time to make sure they really get browned. All right, and for the baby bellas, also known as cremini, these are the two varieties that I mostly use from the supermarket. You can find them really almost everywhere. You're gonna pop off the stem and you're going to slice, same thing. So I always work with the cap down, tucking my fingers really small. And for this, we're just gonna go into slices. Every slice I'd say is about 1/4 of an inch thick. Okay, so it's gonna retain, you don't want it too thin because then it might fall apart, but you don't want it so thick that it's not gonna cook all the way through. So for the stems, for the cremini mushrooms, you can use these stems. You can chop them up and add them right in with the rest of the mushroom. So cremini mushrooms, the stems are fine to use, which is always very exciting because then we don't throw them out. I actually like to save them and make broth with them, so that's what I'm going to do with these today. And the way that you would do that is you would take your stems, you could add the shiitake stems as well, put them in a pot of cold water, and bring it to a boil. So you don't want, a huge pot of water for just this many mushrooms. I would say if you've got, a cup or 2 of mushrooms, you probably could make add 5 to 6 cups of water and just let it cook until it reduces to about 4 cups of water. So that way it's gonna give it time to really absorb all of the flavor. Another question came through.
Yes. Which mushroom do the baby bella taste the most like? This is E. She says she never had them. They look like the button ones.
Yeah, they look like the button ones, but brown. So they are, I'd say they taste very similar to Portobello. So let's add our shiitake mushrooms in here as well. And I'm just kind of moving this around. Now there's kind of a sweet spot. Let's add a pinch of salt because that's going to help us out here to draw the moisture out from the mushrooms. There's kind of a sweet spot with mushrooms because you want them to brown, but as they are exposed to heat, the first thing they're going to do when they go in your pan is they're going to soak up all the oil. And you're going to think, oh gosh, I think I need to put more oil. It looks kind of dry. But then if you have a little salt in there and you give it a little more time, eventually the mushroom starts to relax and let go of some of its juices. So you end up with more moisture in the pan. So it kind of starts out sucking everything out of the pan, and then it releases its moisture and juice as it's exposed to more heat. So be a little patient with mushrooms. I have this sort of on a medium-high heat right now, and I'm starting off the back pan to get that hot as well for the other recipe. Any other questions?
Yes. Can dogs and cats have mushrooms cooked or raw?
I don't know. That would be a question for your vet. I'm really not sure. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I'm going to get this pan hot back here to make the second recipe, which is the mushroom pate. So I want to get that kind of started. So I have some shallots for this one instead of onion. You'll see same basic principles here. Shallots instead of onion. We have herbs, again, some rosemary and thyme. We've got some garlic cloves, right? So far, very similar. And we're going to be using white wine in both of these recipes to deglaze the pan. So getting this pan hot back here. For the mushroom pate, we're going to start with the shallots and the mushrooms together. Then we're going to add the garlic and the herbs. So I'm getting this hot, adding enough oil to cover the bottom, adding our shallots, chopped shallots, just about a cup or so. I like shallots a lot, so I sometimes add a little more than a cup. It's helpful to have onions with mushrooms. For some reason, I feel like it really balances out the flavor of the mushrooms. So just kind of poking out these shallots a little bit. Have some that I think I need to sharpen my knife because my shallots are still sticking together. It's telling me it's time to sharpen the knife. Okay, there we go. Kind of spread them out a little bit. They'll relax a bit more when they are exposed to heat. The shallots will start to kind of open up and cook more evenly. All right, so you've got the shallots back there. We're going to add more mushrooms. So again, for the pate, I've got the cremini mushroom. And same thing here, no stems, simple slice. Nothing fancy. The great thing about mushrooms is you don't have to do anything fancy with them because they're so good just as they are. So let's pop these into the pan and just allow those to get some flavor and color back here while we work on this pan up here. So if you noticed, I sort of started to stir this in the beginning, but then I just let it sit, right? So with mushrooms, you want to let them sit and sear, just like meat and fish. You don't want to move them around too much because then they're not going to develop that wonderful browning flavor. All right, and that's really where you're going to get your mushrooms to shine. So have a look in here, right? You can see they're really nicely browned. And at this point, there's all this wonderful stuck brown stuff at the bottom, not burned, it's flavor. So we're gonna add white wine. That's gonna help to deglaze the pan, and the mushrooms are gonna soak up that wine flavor. So just quickly now, you add the wine, you move it around so that the wine has access to every inch of the pan, and you're gonna notice sort of a sauce forming, right? Sort of like a brown sauce coming up. That's fantastic, because that is the flavor of the mushrooms that was stuck to the pan, but now is coming up, lifting and glazing your mushrooms and really getting them to be super flavorful. So now just notice the difference. Okay, that's what you want to look for. All right, we're ready for our crushed tomatoes, 2 cups of canned crushed tomatoes. Adding that in. We're gonna fold that together quickly. And you want it to thicken a little bit. You don't want this to be too liquidy. So I'm just gonna let it simmer for, a few minutes, just like 1 to 5 minutes to allow some of that liquid to evaporate. And when you add the tomato in, it's gonna bring the temperature of the pan down, right? Because the tomatoes are cold, essentially, right, from the pan. So feel free to encourage the heat up a little bit higher, and that'll help you to boil out some of that liquid. Our mushrooms and shallots are just back there, no worries. Starting for the pate. And then we're gonna add our cheese. So we're gonna add about half of the cheese right in, and then the other half on top. Or we could just do, a little bit of cheese on top. Or actually, you know what, since this is a plant-based class, I'm gonna show you guys a way to make it where everybody can enjoy it if they're not having cheese. So we have our polenta here. And what we're gonna do is we're just gonna scoop all of this mixture on top of the polenta. It's gonna go into the preheated oven, and we're just gonna put cheese on top, but only on half for our non-cheese friends. So that way we've got some options, right? If you're working with a crowd that is dairy-free as well. All right, most of this liquid is starting to simmer out. That looks really nice. We're ready to put this on top of our polenta. This has the tomato, it has the mushrooms, it has the onion and the herbs. And you can just kind of try to get it evenly over the entire dish. So this is a great thing for feeding a crowd, or even you could freeze it if you are not expecting a crowd, which not many of us are expecting a crowd these days. So certainly it's a nice kind of way to use up lots of mushrooms. All right, so let's pop this into the oven. Like I mentioned, we're just gonna do half cheese for our cheesy friends, and then we'll do half without. Why not, right? Custom plant-based. Okay, I guess this half is getting a lot of cheese then. All right, so you can see the layers, and we're gonna put this into the oven. Questions about this recipe?
Not about the recipe, but Jen has a question about, is it healthier to saute the onions or to eat them raw?
It is definitely healthier to saute and cook your onions as well as your mushrooms. Well, I guess healthier, I actually don't know if it's healthier, because there might be some compounds that change when you cook onions, but thinking about it, it's tastier when you cook your onions. So let me rephrase that. It's tastier when you cook your onions, healthier, you might lose out on some nutrients, but generally speaking, onions are very mineral rich. They're not high in heat sensitive vitamins like vitamin C, which are gonna get cooked out in cooking. So I think you're gonna be okay with your onions, your cooked onions. You're not really gonna lose out on much. All right, so let's move to our pate recipe. I have my food processor here. I got my shallots and my mushrooms cooking back here. And moving them around a little bit. I actually am gonna use, I think I'm gonna use the bigger pan because it's just a little bit roomier. So let's do a quick transfer just to give the mushrooms more space. Mushrooms are like, they just need their space. All right, there we go. That's much better. So the shallots are softening, the mushrooms are browning. Again, same process for this as well. We're gonna get our garlic in there. So just crushing the cloves. I'll scoop this back so you guys can see better. All right, so you can use 1 to 3 cloves of garlic, depending on how much garlic you like. Again, garlic is one of those flavor compounds that just works really well with mushrooms. And I'm just cracking them to kind of take that papery exterior off, trimming the bottom. You can really do a very lazy rough chop on these because everything is going to go into the food processor. So that's the beauty with this recipe. You don't have to be too exact with your chopping. All right, we're going to add a little bit of salt, again, to help encourage that moisture to come out of the mushroom. And we're going to add our herbs. So I've got rosemary and thyme for this one. We have a little bit of wine going in this too. So similar starting point, right? No tomato in this one though, because I didn't want the tomato to kind of, for mushroom pate, I really want like the mushroom to shine. And I want to use flavor compounds that heighten like help the mushroom to shine and don't like hide it so much, which tomato can do a little bit. So we've got like the mushroom polenta gratin is great if you're kind of new to mushrooms because it's, you know, tomato and cheese and corn, and those are very familiar and delicious. And then we've got something for our mushroom lovers who just really like the flavor of mushrooms. So here goes the wine. Same thing, we're gathering up all of that great browning flavor on the bottom. Our herbs, everything is just coming together really nicely. Our garlic. And then we're gonna pop this into our food processor with some toasted walnuts. Now, because the mushrooms are, you know, this is kind of a liquidy mixture, you're gonna want something that helps to absorb that moisture and gives you that pate texture. So we've got walnuts that I just toasted in a pan. And you don't really need to do anything else to them because the walnuts have oils in them naturally. So you don't need to toast them in oil or anything like that. Just put your pan on a medium heat, add your walnuts, and occasionally move them around until they smell heavenly, and then you're ready. Okay. So this is ready. Just want to show you again how do you know that it's ready? So you can see the mushrooms are browned. They have that wonderful glaze from the wine. The herbs are softened, the garlic is softened, and the shallots are also sort of translucent and softened. So we're ready to process. We've got our food processor here. We can start with adding our walnuts. And I'm gonna add another thing to this, which is miso and mustard. So this is miso paste. And this is to give it a little bit of like a salty, cheesy flavor. And then the mustard, just another great thing that works well with mushrooms. We'll get this nice and fine. Okay, we'll add the rest of our ingredients here. I'm gonna use this spatula to make sure I really gather as much of the flavor from the bottom of the pan as I can. And I wish I could do this towards you so you don't just see the bottom of the pan, but I am not that ambidextrous. So here we go. And we're gonna add our remaining ingredients, the miso and the mustard, and then you're done. Really not a very complicated dish. It's a wonderful sort of crowd-pleasing, nice thing to make if you're tired of hummus as a dip, which sometimes I get a little tired of because we have it so much at home, but it's nice to have something a little different. So you've got this meaty walnut flavor, you've got this deep, rich mushroom umami flavor, and this is going to be your mushroom pate. How it looks when it's done. You may need to use a spatula just to kind of, squish it down the sides a little bit. Okay. And I'm just going to get a couple of dishes to serve. Actually, I use the white dish so you'll see the mushroom better. Now, this is sort of the unfortunate thing about mushroom pate is not the most attractive color, but it is so delicious. It's this sort of, I think it's a lovely beige, like beigeish brown color. And, I love it. So it's real, I'm kind of partial to it. So we've got our nice pate. It's still warm. So what I would do now is I would put it in the refrigerator to kind of let it chill, allow the flavors to spend a little more time together. And that way, you serve it chilled. So it ends up being more of a dip than something that's warm like this. But yeah, it's quite easy to make mushroom pate. I think a lot of people don't really think of it as like a delicious, easy thing to make, but I hope that today I have showed you differently. Any questions about our recipes? And I have a lot I want to talk about in terms of mushrooms.
Yes, there's a couple of quick questions. So there was a follow-up question to the saute or eat raw. He wanted to know, what about other vegetables?
Other vegetables. Okay, so I'm actually going to be teaching a class possibly in July on nutrient density and discussing, which vegetables and which fruits are best eaten raw or cooked and how long to cook them and all of that stuff. So, because it's a very complex and full topic. So I'm going to be teaching a class on that piece. So please stay tuned and come back for more.
All right. So Valerie had a comment about checking with your vet, but she thinks that some mushrooms can be dangerous to dogs.
Yeah, that would be my intuition as well. Valerie, thank you for sharing that.
Judy,
any other questions?
Yes, Jan wants to know, what kind of salt is that? Kosher salt?
Yes. Yeah, so the salt that I'm using today is kosher salt. I believe it comes in this big box, the diamond crystal one. This is the one that most chefs like to use. It's really, it's called diamond crystal because of its shape. So it coats food really well and melts into food really well. Some salts, if you put it under a microscope and you look at the crystals, they're more square shaped, and this is more diamond shaped. So as a result, it kind of melts and coats food better and integrates with the flavors as opposed to other salts. So that's sort of my preference. There's a whole world of salts out there. There's pink Himalayan, gray sea salts. Certainly, if you like those salts, feel free to use them. I find that they can be a little on the pricier side. So I just like to use something that is accessible to everyone. But certainly some of those other salts are more mineral rich, and that can be really nice too.
Two quick questions.
From a nutrition standpoint. Yes.
Any particular type of white wine?
I just used Sauvignon Blanc. You can use any kind of wine that you would drink. Please do not use a cooking wine. I know that they're there in the food aisle, but they are not good to cook with. First of all, they're extremely salty, right? So if you're cooking with cooking wine, it's going to add a ton of sodium to your food, and they're just not very good. So any wine, sort of dry white wine, I think works well for cooking with mushrooms in general. It doesn't have to be the fanciest bottle either, right? It could be sort of just something drinkable because you're going to be eating it, right?
So how long can you keep the pate in the fridge?
How long can you keep it for? So what I usually do is I take a plastic wrap and I press it across the top. So that's sort of how I store it. And then just making sure that there's no contact with the air. And then because it's a mushroom pate, it can keep for 5 to 7 days. It's not like, you know, a meat chicken liver or something, which is only good for 3 days. Like this, you could make this today and serve it on Sunday. It'd be fine.
That's it.
Okay. So why mushrooms? So mushrooms allow you to add a lot of extra taste without sodium or fat. A note, because there's a lot of people who are starting to forage mushrooms, just be mindful because poisonous mushrooms can be very hard to identify in the wild. So you should always buy your mushrooms from a reliable grocery store or market, or if you are foraging, know what you're doing. Know what you're doing. The most common types that are found in grocery stores are going to be your shiitake, which we use today, the Portobello, which is the bigger one, the cremini, which is this one that we also use today, the button, also known as the white button mushroom. You also might find, on occasion, you might find these sort of like fancy mushroom mixes or blends or medleys that often include things like oyster mushrooms, maitake mushrooms, and sometimes enoki mushrooms. So I think I included a beautiful, yes, a beautiful little picture in your handout of what these mushrooms look like so you can see them. So you will have this handout. If you don't have it already, I'll send it to you after class. The chanterelles are lovely as well. They're very expensive, so I don't use them that often, but they're seasonal, so it's nice to treat if you want to treat yourself to something, you know, special. I would just, if you're going to cook with chanterelles, because they're such a lovely, delicate and unique flavor, or any kind of like morels or the more expensive ones, just put them in the pan with a little bit of, you know, oil and salt or a little butter if you're feeling, you know, extra luxurious, and just cook them until they're lightly browned and enjoy them on their own. There's when you're working with mushrooms that are a little bit fancier and wilder, there's no need to get them, you know, muddied with anything else because they're just lovely on their own. Okay, so other things about mushrooms. So when you choose your mushrooms, you want to make sure that they're firm. They shouldn't be moist or slimy. If you pick one up and it's a little slimy, they should also not have any visible mold on them. Again, they can be stored in a paper bag. I think I mentioned this already, inside the fridge for about 5 days. And you want to clean them by brushing the dirt off with a clean, damp dish towel. When working with the cremini and the shiitake mushrooms, the ones we worked with today, sometimes I will wash them under water, but very, very quickly. So I'll fill a big bowl with water, cold water, dump them in, give them a quick bath, less than 5 seconds, and then quickly pull them out so the dirt will fall to the bottom. Because like I mentioned, mushrooms are tiny sponges and they will absorb water, which will dilute their flavor. Let's just take a pause and check on our gratin, because it smells delicious and done. Yeah, this looks really good. So it's bubbling, the cheese is melted. If you wanted to, you could broil it for a moment just to kind of brown the top. But oh my goodness, this just looks so, so good. So you've got cheese side and not cheese side. So how do you know when it's done? Well, a lot of the liquid has evaporated out, and the mushrooms on top have just like a nice little browning to them. So it only takes about 15-20 minutes when you get to this stage. Okay, nutritional benefits of mushrooms. There are so many wonderful reasons to eat mushrooms, and the varieties that are particularly nutrient dense and high in all kinds of things are going to be the Asian varieties of mushrooms, your shiitake, your maitake, and there are 2 mushrooms that are sort of more medicinal. One is reishi, and another one is chaga. So those 2 you probably won't find even at the farmer's market, but you can find often in health food stores. They'll have supplement forms of these mushrooms because they're so powerful. So you can't go wrong with mushrooms. Again, they're fat-free, low sodium, low calorie, and they're cholesterol-free as well. They're packed with fiber, vitamins, minerals, And the nutritional benefits vary depending on the type of mushroom. But overall, they're a good source of antioxidants. So antioxidants, we talk about these a lot. They're what help protect the body from damaging free radicals. Now, what's a free radical? It can be the exhaust coming out from the car in front of you. It can be a pesticide. It can be, unclean water. So free radicals can be found in our environment. It's a natural part of living in a somewhat polluted world because we are here doing things to the planet. And so we have free radicals that are naturally occurring and man-made as well. But the antioxidants help to protect our bodies from these free radicals. Antioxidants also may help to boost your immune system, and mushrooms in particular are rich in a type of antioxidant that's called selenium. You may have heard of it. It's very high in Brazil nuts as well. They're the best source of selenium apart from Brazil nuts that are from plants. The other really cool thing about mushrooms is this specific kind of soluble dietary fiber called beta-glucan. Now, there are all kinds of different fibers, right? We usually just think of fibers in terms of soluble and insoluble, but there's many, many different kinds and subcategories, and beta-glucan is one of these kinds. This particular kind of fiber has strongly been linked to improving cholesterol and boosting your heart health. And when I say improving cholesterol, I mean, getting the right numbers in the right way. It can also help your body to regulate blood sugar. So it's very, very good for reducing the risk of type 2 diabetes. And the types of mushrooms that are particularly high in the beta-glucan are oyster mushrooms and shiitake mushrooms. So those are your friends. And then they're also high in B vitamins. They're high in riboflavin, niacin, and a pantholithic, I can't say that one, acid, which is very, very beneficial for the nervous system. So mushrooms have B vitamins, beta-glucan, and antioxidants. And if that's not reason enough to enjoy them, they're also delicious. Finally, there's copper and potassium. So some of the minerals that we tend to be deficient in actually are magnesium and copper. Potassium, I think generally as humans we do okay with, but magnesium and copper we're usually pretty low in. Copper helps your body make red blood cells. So that's really important, right? These blood cells help to deliver oxygen all over the body. This mineral is also important to other processes in the body, like maintaining healthy bones. It's also helpful for balancing your nerve impulses. So 1 cup of mushrooms can provide about 1/3 of your daily recommended amount of copper, which is really important to us. All right, I think that's the nutrition point. We talked about the flavor and the different kinds and how to store them and what to do with them and how to choose them. Botanically, they're a fungus. They're different from the rest of the plants that we eat. You mentioned in the beginning that the flavor deepens as they age. That is correct. They can be sauteed, marinated, grilled, broiled, and added to stuffings and things like that as well. We talked about cleaning them. You always want a big roomy skillet when cooking them, and usually 1 pound of mushrooms serves like 2 to 4 people. Fun fact, they are the largest organism on the planet. So there's a honey fungus that's 2.4 miles across, which is just amazing to think about. Genetically, they're actually closer to humans than any other plant, which I don't know, kind of spooks me out a little bit, but it's kind of interesting. And they breathe O2 and exhale CO2. So they're kind of like us. The fruiting body, what you actually see at the top there, that mushroom, is only 5% of the plant, which means that 95% of the plant is happening underground. So there's this incredible network of mushrooming that's happening, under the ground. All right, any questions? Our time is up. I hope I answered everybody's questions. I know someone had a question about portobello mushrooms. I'm not sure that I got to that one, but anything?
So the question from E, that how do mushrooms grow, in quotes, more vitamin D?
Okay, so how do mushrooms grow more vitamin D? So So mushrooms, depending on how they're grown, can contain more vitamin D or less vitamin D. I think that's what you're referring to, E. So I haven't grown mushrooms myself, so I don't actually know, but I know that generally speaking, mushrooms that are grown in environments that have good access to sunshine and good access to, good soil and all of that tend to be higher in vitamin D than the ones that are kind of grown, in a farmhouse, like, a mass structure. But yeah, how you grow mushrooms, just like every single food, by the way, how you grow the food changes its nutrient density. So if you grow your food in very rich soil full of minerals, well, guess what? That food is going to be more full of minerals and more full of nutrients. So an apple is never just an apple. It's really, they might look the same on the outside, but how it's grown, the nutrients that it had access to while it was growing, these are all really important to the actual composition of the apple. The macronutrients are usually more or less the same: the fat, the fiber, the protein, the carbohydrates. But from a mineral standpoint, from a vitamin standpoint, right, it's more nutrient dense when it has access to good growing conditions, which is why it's important to take care of our soil. Any other questions?
No, but lots of comments about great class. They learned so much about mushrooms. People love mushrooms, and they love the recipes.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for your participation as always, your great questions, and I hope you enjoy this beautiful evening. We have 3 classes coming up next week, so please join us again. Share with your friends and family. It's always the highest honor to have your friends and family join us as well. And Alita, thank you as always for moderating. It's a pleasure to have you in our class.
Anytime.
All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.